Okay, hello artists! Welcome back to the 5-day still life painting challenge. Here we are in day 4, and once again we are raising the stakes. Each day we are grappling with a different kind of object, really diving into the similarities and differences between the objects that we're painting. How they're really all very similar, and so many of them are so similar and so much the same that it makes painting so much easier to understand. Okay, so today, we're going to be painting a delicate blue and white porcelain vase. I hope you're excited. I'm excited. Let's dive in and get started. Okay, everybody, welcome back, welcome back. All right, so I've turned my panel this way so that you can see more of what I'm painting today. I just thought, well, if I do it horizontal, it's going to make it so tiny. So I'm switching it this way, and of course, as always, you can do whatever you want to do on your own painting. Okay, so we're doing the same process. We're starting with the basic shape. I like to mass in, as I mentioned, same colors, raw umber. Okay, it's really important that you do establish a painting process that doesn't deviate that much, that stays pretty much the same no matter what you are painting. Even between, still life and landscape and different genres, it's really important that you have a systematic process that makes sense and that works for you every single time. If you're always changing up your palette and your step-by-step process that you do, you're going to run into a lot of confusion and overwhelm. Okay, so I'm just grounding this down with some cast shadow. And then just on the inside of the ellipse, I'm making a single stroke there for my shadow on the inside of the ellipse. And then here's form shadow. Remember that form shadow just follows this side of the form, okay, which is again kind of a cylinder shape, another tapered cylinder, very similar to what we painted on the brass bucket. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is step 2 is that background color. So we're going to do some raw umber, some ultramarine blue, some yellow ochre to get kind of that greenish gray background color going on. I'm just going to pull that all around my object. On this side, I'm going to make it a little bit darker for contrast around the lit side. And then on the right side, I'm actually going to go a little bit lighter, some more yellow, a little bit of white. A little too much white. I tell you, I usually use flake white, so this titanium zinc white is just a little more overpowering than what I'm used to. So let's just add back in some color there, because that's actually going to be similar to the value I want for the shadow on the white. So it was a little too light. And then we can kind of blend that in and mix that in. Okay. And then maybe down here, again, like towards the bottom, a little more ambient light, atmospheric light bouncing up into the horizon line there. And then we want some of that reddish brown color. So I'm going to add in the cad red light right away to this same mixture, cad yellow deep, and just a heck of a lot of that raw umber, get kind of a warmer tabletop color going here for this one. So for those of you maybe who have been wanting to paint that really rich, warm tabletop color, and I've kind of been changing it day to day based on my whims, now you'll understand, how do I make that color with this limited palette. Okay, so we've got all the background stuff painted in. We've got our shadow shapes. And remember, especially on white and bright objects, you're gonna want to remove that raw umber, okay? Or burnt umber if you're using burnt umber. Anything dark on a light or bright area you want to make any of that underpainting, just take it off. And remember that this left edge is really critical to get it nice and clean. We don't want any of that dirty stuff on there that's going to muddy it up. Okay, so I'm just using like my finger. And while I'm here, just kind of getting my drawing a little clearer. This shape should really kind of taper up a little bit more like that. Okay, and I think that is good, a really good place to start. Everything else is relatively clean, maybe just a little more on that neck, okay? You can also use things like Q-tips if you want to. I just find that the paper towel tends to work best for me. And of course, with any materials, the longer you use them, the more adept you get at using them, right? Like you just get used to using what you're using. Okay, so next we want to start with the under white, okay, which is not white. So let's say if the highlight is white, much like what we did on the brass, we know that that underneath color cannot be that same color. So I'm going to use ultramarine blue, some yellow ochre, just a tiniest little pinprick of that cad lemon, just because that yellow ochre can be a bit kind of earthy and bricky. And then with white. Okay, so this is just a little darker in value than pure white. Okay, but it's still really nice and lit up. And even if it feels like a little green to you or maybe a little yellow to you, it's okay. It's going to read as white in the painting, especially once we get the pattern on and all that stuff. But the constraint we're working against is that we just can't paint it pure white. Now remember, this is the most lit up part of the form, is the top part, okay, because our light's coming from above. And so I'm turning my brush to the side here. I'm going to kind of curve this just a little bit. And then I'm going to start the stroke at the end of the light and then lift off inside. I'm going to steal some of my background color here to basically just shape up that ellipse drawing line a little bit more. Okay, now I'm just going to add more of those colors I was using, mostly the ultramarine blue and yellow ochre, and just less white in the mix as we move down the form here. So it's just a little bit darker because this part of the form is tapering back and away from the light source, so it's just getting a little more or a little less light. So you can see that just the gradation of that light tapers off there. And same thing on this side too. You know, so this part of the form is rounded and turning back closer to space. Okay, so there's a little bit of light diminishing there as well. Okay, now we also want to do the shadow color at this juncture, which is a little bit different than some of the other objects we have painted. And the reason why we're kind of bringing that up in the line of things to do is because if we don't get that color and value in the shadow, it'll be very difficult for us to judge, you know, the pattern. Like this by itself is too dark. So I'm just going to use again my ultramarine blue, yellow ochre. Tiniest, this is the only thing that's just going to have the smallest amount of white. And I need something red, so because that cab red light is so strong, I'm going to pull in some of that red tabletop color I mixed up just a little bit ago, because I don't want the under color in the shadow to read totally green. So the red is the opposite of green and will basically desaturate the green. There we go. So this color, the shadow color on white, it's going to look pretty similar to what we have in that background. Okay? And then, you know, we don't need to do a lot here on the transition zone. A lot of that is going to be taken care of because of pattern, but I do like to just soften that edge just a little bit. So I'm really kind of combining those two values together. But I have so much paint down, I can do that. You know, if you're not putting down enough paint, then you really can't work that paint wet into wet like that. I'm going to go ahead and reestablish my cast shadow underneath the form with some ivory black and alizarin crimson, so that this does not feel like it's floating, and I really want this kind of beautiful contrast between the cast shadow and the white of the vase. That's also part of what will make this shadow color make more sense. So painting is really all about contrast, and all of these contrasts are relative to one another. So if you're missing something in the equation that's, you know, should be there as part of the contrast, something might start looking off to you, and then you might keep changing one thing, but it still doesn't look right, and it's because you're missing a piece of the puzzle, right? You're missing part of the contrast that needs to be there in order for that thing to make sense. So now this and this is going to look very similar for right now, and that's okay. What's really going to make them separate out is going to be the pattern. So the pattern really does a lot of work on these patterned objects. So we paint this underneath stuff first, and then the pattern really makes all of it come to life more, makes the form come to life more, all that stuff. Now I do want to add in a little more light right around this lit edge, much like what we did on the orange. So right around this lit edge, I'm going to come in with kind of a yellowy light color, something that's much lighter than the background to start out with, and then along the top as well. Okay, and then I'm going to make it look like I didn't do that, right? So I'm going to come back in with some background color, and we're basically just going to kind of blend that out. But while I'm doing that, I'm also able to kind of finesse that drawing a little bit more, and it also makes my white object look really more lit up. So white objects bounce a lot of light back, just like, you know, if you think about it logically, when we wear a white t-shirt outside, it's like the light is just glowing off of it. When we wear a dark t-shirt, a black t-shirt, it absorbs the light, right? So both really light objects really reflect a lot of light into the surrounding environment, and also bright objects like what we did on the orange. So those are the two things that are really going to put off a lot of light reflection into your backgrounds. Other objects don't do that, like even dark reds, you know, don't do that because they're too dark in value. So dark blues, dark reds, those kinds of colors are too dark in value. If you were to take a photo of this in black and white, you would see how dark in value they are, and because their value is darker, even if they're a saturated color, they're just not going to reflect that much light back into the surrounding environment. Okay, so now I'm going to restate that highlight because it kind of got blended in. You always want your highlight to be the last thing that's really sitting on top of everything else, just paint quality wise. Okay, so we'll just put that nice clean white highlight back on there, and then really wiping my brush, we're going to use that ultramarine blue. This is so beautiful when it's pure. So I'm going to use a little bit of medium and a little bit of white. We're just going to bring a little bit of color into it by adding white. So these really dark transparent colors like alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, they actually get even more colorful when you add just a tiny touch of white to them. Okay, now this can be the scary part, right? Is like, oh my gosh, I don't want to mess this up. But this is how you learn to paint. You have to paint bold. You can't be timid. You can't be fearful, right? So you've just got to do your very best that you can. And then if it doesn't work out, then you can always, scrape this off and do it again. Okay, but because this is like a blue, dark blue on white, it is a little more, the stakes are a little higher, right? I guess than you would say on painting these other objects. Like these are a little easier to correct things, correct mistakes. And not that it can't be done on this type of vase, type of object, but it is, more challenging because the value contrast is so strong on this. Okay, so I'm using that ultramarine blue and white. And, I don't want to kill the light of this object. And so I'm just kind of making, so I'm probably going to put in a little less pattern than what I'm seeing. But I'm really slowing down. You can tell that I'm really slowing down more than I usually do to really think it through. Okay, but I've got to still make brush strokes. All right, now once we go into shadow over here, I'm going to use more of just like a pure blue without white so that it goes darker in value on the shadow. Okay, but I'm making very specific brush strokes. The problem that can happen on this kind of object is that you start trying to blend too much. So in this kind of object, like go bold or go home, right, is the motto. Whoop, wow, and then stuff like that. Good thing my brush wasn't on there, huh? I must not have had that secured enough. Okay, so just darker in value, and actually you can even put a little red in there, like a little alizarin crimson for some of these darker bits, just to extend the warm versus cool. Now, you can tell I've started down here away from that light, the most lit up part of the object, and that's for a reason, because I want to be very conscientious about how much pattern I put there and how dark of a pattern I put there. So to get the effect of something really being lit up, I want to make sure I have enough burnout illusion, burnout effect. Okay, so I'm really building all the pattern all around the other, like staying away from the highlight as long as I can. Now, this has got to curve this way, so that's one way that the pattern brings in that form and perspective, is that we want to kind of get some pattern strokes that are curving, like with this side of the contour, this is going to curve this way. Okay. In the center of the vase, the pattern will be more frontal and more flat facing towards us. So you really want to get that, see these strokes would be more, we're seeing it not in foreshortening is basically what I'm trying to say. Okay, and then our most amount of white in with this blue is going to be right around the highlight. To really get that illusion of, light bleaching out the color of that pattern. Maybe at the very base of it, we're just going to start to go just a tiny touch more blue in there, right here at the base. But really watch your brush pressure. It needs to be very light, and it's not super controlled though. It's not like, you're not choking up on the brush. You're not tightening up your wrist and getting in here and doing this, right? So you're still painting with your arm. And then if you want to do that, you see that deep blue on top, if you want to do that, you totally can. I think I will. I think it adds something a little nice to it, these little curves. And I just want to say, like, all of this is learnable. Especially if you're a beginner, just know that I've been in your shoes, and I understand how challenging and overwhelming it can feel to learn how to paint. But it is learnable, and nobody is just born with this, okay? No matter what they want to try to make you think otherwise. I think all of us artists have a certain amount of, let's say, natural creative ability or natural visual talent, so to speak. But honestly, all of us have to start at the beginning. All of us have to start somewhere, right? And nobody starts fully formed. So you see me just kind of adjusting this edge here. You can do that if you want. But you can, paint on top of that pattern with the white and then redo the pattern as well. That's another option. If you see an area that needs to be adjusted. My contour there was just a little wonky. Okay. And then last but not least, I want to get, a sense of highlight, even though there's not really one there, but because I think this part is not glazed in real life, the top isn't glazed. So it doesn't quite have the same shine as what it has on the porcelain. But I kind of want to get a sense of highlight here on the front of that. And then I would like to also build a little more, just some nuance in the tabletop, some tabletop light, basically bringing in some of that light from the little miniature ginger jar here. And you'll notice my strokes on the tabletop are always horizontal versus in the background they go vertical. And the reason why is because I always want to use my brush strokes to describe the plane that I'm painting on, the direction of the plane that I'm painting on, okay? And then last but not least, if you want to put in a little bit of reflected light into that shadow over here, you certainly can. I think I'm going to leave mine as it is. I kind of lost my shadow here, so I'm going to carve back into that to get a sharper edge on the front of it. But yeah, I think that's good. I think we're done. So I hope that this has been certainly helpful to all of you, and I'm wishing you happy painting. Have a great time. Go at it with boldness and with a fierceness and with some grit and some courage. That's what it takes to be a successful artist, is you've got to demonstrate some courage, right? Every time we step up to the easel, we are demonstrating courage, but paint with courage and with boldness the whole way through as much as you can, and you will develop so much faster as an artist that way.